Welcome to Resilient Minds 365, where we discuss the resilient stories of entrepreneurs, professionals, and students with mental illnesses to encourage you to strive, thrive, and live in abundance. I'm your host, Cleoni Crawford. Welcome to Resilient Minds 365. I'm Cleoni Crawford and I'm your host. So today, everyone, we have a wonderful guest with us. We have Mr. Wayne Gray with us. Who is Wayne? Wayne is the co-founder and partner of Kuinua Consulting Group, as well as a clinical social worker for an Assertive Community Treatment Team with one of the largest mental health agencies in the country. His undergraduate education and training began in the United States before bringing him back to Canada, where he completed his master's degree in social work at Ryerson University. His career is influenced by anti-oppressive framework and has therefore equipped him with a solid foundation when addressing issues of anti-Black racism, factors in contributing to the marginalization of racialized individuals in the mental health sector, and the role of advocacy, mobilization, and allyship in underrepresented racialized groups facing various forms of systemic oppression. With that said, I now present to you Wayne Gray.
Hey, Cleoni.
Hey, Wayne, good to see you
Good
again.
to see you.
Wayne, Wayne is actually one of my case managers with an organization that I actually receive support from. So I brought him on here because I believe he has some really interesting insight into mental health, and I'm hoping that you guys are going to enjoy Mr. Wayne Gray.
Well, thank you for having me, Cleoni.
Okay, so first of all, I'd like you just to tell us a little bit more about your profession.
All right. Yeah, social work, um, broad profession for sure. My niche is right now working social work and mental health. It gives me the opportunity to work with individuals who have been clinically diagnosed with a mental illness. The niche that I work in, Cleone, it is one that is a little bit more specialized. So those who are living with a severe and persistent mental illness, which if gone untreated, can really throw a wrench into a person's quality of life. So in my profession, or what I'm doing right now, is just being sort of like a social broker, ensuring that those that I'm working with are hooked up with the right services that would help them be able to live the quality of life that they so richly deserve, in addition to being able to get some more education around their illness. The nice thing about the my profession, or at least the niche that I am working in, is that it's a multidisciplinary approach. So it's really nice that we can provide kind of like wraparound services for the folks that we work with, where we have people with all sorts of different skill sets and discipline, and forms of education, from case managers to psychiatrists to occupational therapists to concurrent disorder specialists to other social workers. So that is a real special kind of ideal approach that we really are very, very proud of. For me personally, the fact that I'm in a profession where I get to support, educate, advocate, um, do all of those things interchangeably, I think is probably one of the most unique, um, the unique characteristics of being a social worker. So
Wow.
hopefully that helps.
Yeah, that definitely helps. Definitely. So, why did you choose to work in mental health?
You know what? I don't know if I chose to work in mental health. I think mental health sort of chose me, in a way. Um, it was, I mean, when I was in the States, I did undergraduate work in Boston, and I remember, a friend of mine who was not even in the social work program, but just I guess based on my personality, based on how I interacted with people, was saying, "Hey, you know what? You should really think about uh, looking for a job or internship in this organization because I just think that you would really fit well with what they do and the people that they work with." And I took the person up on the offer and found out that it was a mental health agency
Mm,
that pretty much does what I do now. But it was my understanding was it was one of the first programs like this, at least in, if not in the country, definitely in the state of Massachusetts. So I interviewed for it, and the person I was interviewing with felt like, yeah, I would be a good fit. And that's when I was sort of baptized in the world of
mhm,
mental health, and yeah, just really enjoyed it from there, and saw that this was something that I could do for the long term, um, because it allowed for me to not only meet and work with individuals, but then I was able to work with their families or work with other service areas and sort of get a sense and a lay of the land, from hospitals to support or group homes, to working with the government in different facets as it related to policy development or a specific service that the person needed. So yeah, that's pretty much how I got into mental health, and I've just been doing it for the last 15 years.
wow.
Yeah.
I did not know it's 15 years. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's been a while when I think about it.
Wow, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So my next question is
Mm.
how, considering the challenges that you may have in your field, like the pressures, how do you manage your own mental health in the profession that you're in?
Oh yeah, great question. If I had to choose one word, I would have to say support. We're realizing more and more that the more people that you have around you in your support network, uh, the better off you're likely to be. Um, Work-life balance is not an easy thing to find. I know we throw that term around a lot, like it's a pretty cliche-ish term. You need work-life balance. Well, what does that look like? I mean,
Exactly.
depending on what it is that you're doing, work-life balance is not easy to achieve, particularly when you think about what we've had to deal with this last year, where everyone's life has been thrown upside down, basically. I can't imagine, and I know you could relate, Cleone, where a mother is trying to balance work and or school and or also helping their children with their own schoolwork at home, or even a father in that same situation. So work-life balance is not necessarily the easiest thing to achieve, to help balance your own mental health. So supports really do help. For me personally, family supports. I do have the opportunity of working as a psychotherapist as well, and so we've been very intentional of you know the my colleagues, my other psychotherapists, getting together and creating a group so that we're at least able to vent and or just let off steam or talk about things that are difficult in our own lives, at least once a month. The fact that I work with a specialized team for the agency that I work for is also really helpful. They're like family in a lot of ways. And in fact, when you think about it, just by the nature of the job, we probably spend more time with each other than we do with our own families.
Right.
Again, just based on what we do. So it's really important for us to have that camaraderie, being very close knit, and understanding and working with one another. So support is definitely something that's important to me. Music, exercise, when I can, are also really important. And just being able to just, for lack of a better word, just bug out, whether it's with video games, just things that are totally mindless sometimes, where you just can sort of check out for an hour.
Okay. So to continue with that question, so what support is currently available to professionals in the field to help with their mental health, considering the pressures? What are there, you mentioned that you guys would have like a support group among yourselves, we can vent. What other supports are available for professionals? Because I mean, you guys take on a big burden.
Right.
So I assume that you guys may need some sort of outlet in order to release, I guess.
Right, right. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I do know that, again, our agency has an EAP, or an employment specific, employment assistance program that
Right.
we're able to tap into. We've got people internally that really try to ensure us that, whether it's through email or some other media platform, to just ensure us that we are in the know when it comes to having, other additional professional supports that are available. So, like I had mentioned, being a psychotherapist, one of the things, like, that we have been really intentional about, is being able to offer services virtually. So that now is becoming something that people are gravitating towards, where you can go online and literally put in virtual therapist, or virtual mental health assistance, and things will pop up for you. So those are the things that really come to mind.
Mhm.
Is the EIP, the virtual platform, again, just based on what we're dealing with. Um, but yeah, I would leave it there. I'm sure that there are others, but I'm just trying to think of the ones that are probably right now the easiest to access.
Right, right. That makes sense. That makes sense. So now I'm going to switch the questions more towards other, people with mental health challenges. So the
Mm,
question is, considering the diversity in mental illnesses, what are some of the most common mental illnesses and their symptoms?
wow. Okay, good question. Um, I would say, if we're talking about you know, mental health in general, I would say that anxiety, depression, are probably are the more common mental health challenges
Mhm.
that you will find. I don't have the percentages right now, or at the top of my head, but I will say that, um, at least just given my experience, that when I am, doing an intake, or, meeting with a client for the first time, and I'm going through what their intake form looks like, it's typically generalized anxiety, or anxiety related to something specific. Major depression is also something that comes up a great deal. And again, it makes sense too, given what we've been dealing with the last year, in terms of the restrictions that we've been dealing with, and that sort of thing. It is just left people either feeling, sad for long, long periods of time, or anxious for extremely long periods of time, and not knowing, what to do with that sort of energy distortion. Um, Symptoms would include, inactivity when it comes to depression.
Mhm.
Things that you typically would enjoy, you are no longer finding enjoyment in that. Lack of sleep, uh, lack of an appetite, irritability, maybe some forgetfulness, some confusion, getting overwhelmed very quickly. Those are some things that would likely happen. Anxiety can at times present in the same way, where, if you're anxious, you can get overwhelmed very quickly. You could lose your appetite. You could lose sleep. There, there are times where, just in terms of trying to recall something or remember something, could be difficult as well. So they do have some similar symptoms as well. It's one of those things where, when you talk with the individual, you can get a better sense of what it is that is going on. But those are probably the most common, and particularly, when I think about the generation coming up. So for uh, one of the, I think, the interesting things for your audience, Cleoni, is when you think about the Generation Z demographic, so those are kids, I believe, that 2006 born, 2006 and beyond, or after 2006, would be in the Generation Z demographic. And that is a demographic that, we know they've never known a world without a cell phone. So in terms of just being, overstimulated with the amount of data that our cell phones, our little pocket computers carry, and that sort of thing, that can lead to a lot of different things. The access to social media, you know, those are the type of things that we think are pretty benign, but not necessarily. And we're seeing now, like, there's research and data that's showing for our Generation Z demographic that, they are one of the demographics that are showing the highest percentage now of depression and or anxiety. The
Wow.
good news, though, is that they're also a demographic that's not afraid to necessarily seek help should they need it.
Okay, that's good. That's good.
Mhm.
It's good that they're willing to seek out help, even though that generation tends to be quite antisocial.
Yeah, and you can guess why, right? They
Yeah,
don't need to go anywhere. They got everything right in their phone.
precisely, precisely.
So
So
true.
definitely. So my next question is, so what are a few things that you have learned from working with your clients? What is helpful to them and what isn't helpful?
Oh, wow. Yeah. Let's start with what is not helpful.
Okay.
So I think one, what's not helpful is creating a power dynamic. And what I mean by that is creating a dynamic where the client feels like they are, quote unquote, just a client, and the person they're working with is the clinician, the be all end all clinician, and or the therapist making all of the decisions. And there's this power imbalance that obviously takes place. I don't think that fosters trust
Right.
necessarily, or not the type of trust that's needed. So that's one thing. I think it's really important as clinicians or people in the profession to really try to establish a relationship where they're respecting the person that they're working with, and respect how, in fact, their decisions, their actions are just as much a part of them and the whole dynamic as anything else. So in other words, being client centered is part of that. If you are a client-centered professional, that means that you're working in collaboration with that client. I think it's important, again, uh, just being a black male myself, and having a burning desire to educate marginalized, racialized communities, understanding that systemic oppression comes in various forms, and one of those can be in the interventions that people can decide to use,
Right.
with individuals as it relates to either being in crisis or, needing help mental health wise. So I'm not here to pick on any particular institution, but what I am saying is that it's 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 not in the best interest, a working interest, working with a client where you're making decisions about what is the best step to take without consulting the client first and
Right.
letting them know exactly what it is that you feel is the best approach, and having a discussion around that. So I think those are a couple of things that are not what not to do. What to do, you definitely want to develop a good therapeutic rapport. So, I think you and I, Cleone, we talk. I always say to you, I want to be transparent with you.
Yes.
I want to be, make sure that, you and I have an understanding of what's going on. So transparency, I think, is important. Equality, is something that's going to foster a good relationship. Being able to just hear the client's perspective. In other words, to have a great deal of empathy, like
Yes.
to hear what the client is saying, and then say to yourself, well, wow, if I was in that position, you know, I would likely be feeling the same way. Or what would I do, now that my client has explained this to me? So I think those are a few things that, should be taking place in that relationship.
Okay. Those are some really good points. Empathy and making sure that you're transparent. Those are some really good points there. Um, the next question I have is, when a family or friend is in crisis, what information do you require to help that individual?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I'm going to make this, I'll try to make it brief because, you typically would want as much information as possible. But I think um, the first thing that comes to mind, Cleone, is, if the person is in crisis, so what does that crisis look like? Is that crisis where, that person has put themselves in harm's way, or have is anyone else in harm's way as a result of the crisis? um, what supports, or if any, can we access really quickly? um, you know what does the crisis look like? Because crisis again can be pretty subjective,
Right.
just in terms of what a person. We've had folks who have called and said, I'm in crisis, and when you are able to sort of tease out what's going on, then you change your game plan. You know what I mean? But I think, to answer your question, Cleone, I'd want to know, again, anyone in harm's way, either the client or whoever's with the client, and is there any supports that can be accessed really quickly to help alleviate whatever that crises is? And if not, do we need to then call some professional to help, or intervene in that regard? But I think that's where I'd want to start.
Okay, cool. And what are some things that family or friends do to loved ones in crisis that they need to stop doing?
Ooh, yeah. Um, One of the things that is not helpful, and and it probably happens in more communities than we think, but when someone is in a quote unquote crisis situation, and friends and or family members are just telling them stop it, or you know just get a grip, that kind of thing, it's not helpful. um, I think that one of the things that we forget is that when a person is demonstrating that they're in crisis, they're acting normally given the abnormal circumstances that are surrounding them.
Right.
So if a person is dealing, like if they're overwhelmed with symptoms as it relates to their mental illness, their reaction is probably, as it may look abnormal to other individuals, that is a normal reaction given the abnormality of what's happening in their minds. And so that's I think one of the things that we have to sort of remember is it's not necessarily the best helpful to just tell people to just stop, when in fact we may not be understanding what exactly is going on. Um, yeah, I think I would leave it there. I think it's just important for family and friends to be as understanding as they possibly can, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Be intentional with the person that they're talking to and saying, "Hey, listen, I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to upset you. I'm asking you this question because I genuinely don't know the answer, and go ahead and ask your question." So sort of preface what you're trying to do. Like, let the person know that you really do want to help them.
Exactly, exactly. Good points. The next question I have for you is, what supports are available in the community to help people with mental health challenges? Uh,
Sorry, what's the
what supports are
oh,
available?
supports? Yeah. Woo. Supports, that's a tough one. You know what? Listen, I'll say this. Honestly, Cleoni, there are many supports. What really is the challenge is how do you navigate those supports?
Right.
Because that's where the challenge really, because like mental health, even though we are talking about mental health more and more these days, which is great, what we don't necessarily have, unless you are either in the business of mental health or you are a consumer or service user of mental health on a fairly regular basis, navigating the systems is not easy. That's really what it comes down to. So typically what people do is they access what they are used to, which may not necessarily be the most appropriate um, scenario or the most appropriate response to what's going on. So in terms of supports, like you had mentioned, like I work for a community mental health agency, but there's a process, right, to be a service user or consumer, to be part of that community, that mental health agency. And it's like that for various other mental health agencies across the city and or province.
Mhm.
Most people would probably, again, depending on the situation, people would likely try to access a hospital, try to access maybe a crisis center, um, you know, uh, to at least get their initial needs met. But even in those situations, there's a process that needs to happen. The nice thing is that we have supports where, again, you know, thank God for the internet, where you can Google and find that if there are at least, there are apps now. There are apps that, again, depending on your situation, there are apps that are appropriate to access, to hopefully get maybe some general questions answered, or maybe to just get some feedback with respect to something that you might be going through. There are hotlines or 800 numbers. 211 is definitely something that you'd want to access to be able to ask the operator those appropriate questions to see if there is something more specific that you need. But again, I think really what we have to remember is navigating systems isn't always easy. So that's probably where the real challenge is.
Wow. That's unfortunate that, even though the services are there, getting to the services can be a challenge that can be
Yeah,
frustrating for people.
it can be. It really can be. Like, there, for my friends and or family who know what I do, they will typically call me and say, "Hey, Wayne, this is a situation. What can I do?" Uh, so we know now it's not as easy as picking up our cell phone and making a call and getting that answer. There may be things that we have to you know we might have to make 2 or 3 calls in order to get the service that we actually really need.
Wow.
Yeah. And I know that, you know, agencies and communities, they see that issue too, and trying to make it easier. But yeah, it's still a work in progress.
Okay. The next question I have for you is, in your opinion, who are the ideal support systems for someone in crisis? What does that person look like?
So in say that, I'm sorry, Cleoni. So
In your opinion, who are ideal support systems for someone in crisis?
who are ideal support systems to someone in crises?
Mm-hmm.
Ah, yeah. um, you know, I think so. I've got the I'm really fortunate to be working with an advisory group for the city of Toronto right now in terms of just looking at that very question. You
Mm-hmm.
know, in terms of what is it that the you know what's the makeup of an appropriate service in for someone in crisis. And the research and data that we've been looking at would demonstrate that having someone who can really understand and empathize with that individual from a life experience perspective, so a peer, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
is something that's really important. Um, Having someone like myself, or you know, someone in the social work field, uh, again, who demonstrates empathy, but also has a sort of a good sense or knowledge of the mental health landscape. If we're talking about a mental health crisis, would probably be someone who is appropriate. I think a family member or someone that the individual trusts, you
Mm-hmm.
know, has some rapport with, is also really important to have. And again, depending on the crisis, you may need to have, you know, whether it's a paramedic or, you know, somebody from the emergency response services there to ensure that, you know, that person is safe. Again, depending on the crisis. But I think ideally those would probably be the 3 or 4 components
Mm-hmm.
that would make up, you know, an ideal response or ideal team to respond to a crisis. I know it's not easy. It may seem like pie in the sky. For
Mm-hmm.
right now, I think if we're talking about right now, again, what I like to tell people is, you know, if you feel like you've got to have immediate intervention, you've got to access emergency response, you know, if you're able to not necessarily call 911, but call directly to the dispatch center and explain, you know, what's going on, so that the operator is able then to at least ascertain your information and then say, okay, these are the type of services that you need. Now, that may or may not work, because we know where we live, Cleoni, here in the GTA, that typically when you access emergency response, you know, you're still going to get police officers showing up and that sort of thing, depending on what the situation is. But what we're trying to do is just make sure that at least there is an understanding of what the situation looks like beforehand, because we do know that, you know, when you think about just how emergency response works, particularly when we're talking about police, you know, they are trained essentially to do a few things, right? To maintain control, to you know, elicit compliance and cooperation, um, and um, and to do those things, you know, when they're trying to enforce compliance or maintain control, or, you know, seek cooperation, depending on what the crisis is, that's not always the easiest thing to do, and
Right.
it can make things complicated. So that's why I say go through dispatch, explain what's going on so they have more context.
Right, right, right. Okay. And how can I support someone with a mental health challenge before, during, and after a crisis?
Ah, wow, yeah. Before is, I would say, like we talked a little bit about this, asking questions and being intentional with those questions and letting them know you're not trying to irritate them, but you're just really trying to gain as much information as you can so you can best help them. Um, as best you can convey that they can trust you during that time, because in a crisis we know that's difficult, right? It's just so many things going on. It's just really hard to make sense of what that person is going through, let alone the person themselves really trying to understand what it is when they're in real crisis.
Mhm.
During, I'd say, so that's probably before, or at least when they're maybe going into crisis, if you will. Those are the things that you'd probably want to do. Um, Listen to them as best you can, for sure. I would say, during the crisis, or at least when now the crisis is sort of in that phase where things are being handled,
Mhm.
if you can be an advocate, you know, allyship is so important. Just to be able to advocate for that person, during the time when they are probably at their most vulnerable.
Right.
If you're able to step into that gap and advocate for that person in a way that uh, you know not only does the person know that you're for them, but the people that are working with them also can look to you and say, hey, you know what, Cleoni really just wants to make sure that things are happening in the right way at the right time for this person. And after, it might not be a bad idea um, to sit down and talk, about supports, talk about creating a crisis plan, you know, that the person has input in, to say, okay, these are the things, should this happen again, these are the things that I would like to see happen, or these are the people I'd like to be contacted. This is where I would like, to go, should I need to go someplace. But I think after is a really good time to just sit down and plan out what things should look like moving forward.
Okay, that makes sense. Especially the crisis plan. That's a very helpful document, which I personally helped get created for me, and I find them very helpful, especially for other people to kind of read it and to see exactly what's what you're looking for when you're in crisis, and it's good to have it documented.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Um, what are some things that you can do to support someone who mentions they are suicidal?
That's big. So that's something that, it's interesting. I think it's human nature for us to want to sort of skate around if someone mentions that. And again, it's level of comfort, that most of us have with respect, or lack of comfort that most of us have when it comes to, a situation like that. Because we're talking about, someone potentially dying, um, and dying unnaturally. So that's not necessarily something that you feel comfortable talking about. But when you do training, trainers will tell you, no, you need to be direct. You need to really, get the information and understand, what, where, when, those type of questions. And if they're saying to you when, like they have an exact time, that's an indication let's take it very seriously.
Right.
And let's put things in place that are going to support that individual. And be very transparent about that your intention is not to see them go, that you want to be able to keep that person here, and you want to be able to help them as best you can.
Hmm.
um, I would say, it, for the purpose of this discussion, Cleone, I would just say that it's important to just be very intentional with respect to your questions. Like maybe one of the questions that you could ask that person is, if you were to give me a percent of how much life means to you right now from 0 to 100%, where would you be? And hear what their response is. And the next question, what can we do to move that up? Because I want you here with me. So
Right.
what do you need right now, so we're able to push that percentage up, you know? And don't be afraid to say, who can I get to, in on this conversation to help us, someone that you can trust. Keep them involved, in that conversation. Try to follow their lead as best you can, because anything that they are suggesting that, reflects that they want to be here, you probably want to really consider, in your plan.
Right.
Um, but just let them know that you're going to be intentional, that you want them to be here. You're asking very direct questions. Um, and I think those are good places to start. And don't be afraid to, to ask them, who else can we bring into the conversation to help us out.
Okay, cool. What if my loved one or friend needs to be hospitalized? What would I do? What do I do in that case?
Yeah. Again, that's a complicated question, right, Cleoni? Particularly in our racialized communities, um, it it's difficult, because the the data would support that, we are overrepresented in institutions that may not necessarily be beneficial to us or in our favor, and or even, you know um, getting access to a hospital, even if it's appropriate, if it's not done in a way that is is um, is taking that person's dignity into consideration. It can be a pretty traumatic, harrowing experience.
Hmm.
So to get someone hospitalized, if that's in fact what is needed, again, we have what's available to us right now, and um, typically a person's going to access emergency response. Um, Again, if possible, I would say, you know, call, call the emergency response, whether it's police, call directly, ask to speak with someone in dispatch so you can properly explain what is going on. Ask them if they have what is known as a mobile crisis intervention team,
Okay.
MCI team, to better handle, hopefully better handle what's going on. Because for your listening audience, a mobile crisis team is, a team of a police officer who has been trained in mental health, as well as a mental health nurse. Uh, you know, I know that's still not, it may not necessarily be the best option,
Hmm.
but it is probably the option that is best right now. Uh, and the reason I say that is because, again, looking at data and listening to different communities around the city and the GTA, they'll tell you that, just seeing someone in uniform, it can be a traumatic experience depending on whether or not that person's had, different run-ins, or altercations or interactions, if you will, with people in uniform. So, even though the MCI team is appropriate for the situation, the uniform may be a trigger and create some complications there. But to answer your question, Cleone, I would say, if someone needed to go into the hospital, I would suggest calling, the police department directly. Not, if you can, of course, if it's an absolute emergency, by all means, 911.
Right.
But if you've got a situation where, you feel like in using the best judgment you have that you're able to call the police department directly, ask for dispatch, ask them if they have a mobile crisis intervention team, explain the situation, and believing that this person may need to be hospitalized, and where is the closest hospital that they can go to be evaluated. That is probably what I would have them do.
Okay, perfect. So, what words of hope can you give to our listeners?
Haha, words of hope. Hey, listen, folks, there are some really good supports, really good clinicians, service workers in mental health. It's really nice to see, people that we would, uphold in like celebrity status, Cleoni, who, are coming out and sharing their challenges with mental health. It's really good to see that the conversation is about normalizing mental health. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if 1 in 5 individuals are going to develop, some sort of mental health challenge in their life, the likelihood is that, and the likelihood is, we could be in that position. There's a strong likelihood that we could be in the position of needing help. And the truth is, 100% of us know of someone who knows of someone who is dealing with a mental health challenge. So the fact is that we're normalizing the conversation. Don't be afraid to speak out. Mental health needs to be treated like we treat our physical health. It's one and the same. If you don't have your physical health, your mental health is going to suffer. And if you don't have your mental health, your physical health is going to suffer. They're symbiotic in that regard. It's health is health. So don't be afraid to speak out, and have those conversations. And of course, Cleoni, what you're doing, and sharing this stuff, get it out there. The fact that you are an advocate as well as a service user, and putting all that, this information out there, keep doing what you're doing.
Perfect. Thank you so very much. I appreciate you saying that. So, we're going to switch this up a little bit, and then we're going to end it off. So, my question is about music therapy. As you can see behind me, there's a book. It's called The Music of My Life, which is the book that I wrote. And
Yep.
I talk about music therapy, and I talk about my journey. So, with that said, what type of music do you like?
Oh, yes. All right. So I am definitely neo soul, gospel, are my go-tos. African beats is another one that I go to. But yeah, I would say the top three, definitely gospel, neo soul, African beats. House music I can get into, anything anything with a beat, anything that, is just, puts me in a mood where um that music is uplifting. Like the it's got a drive to it. Is probably gonna keep me captivated for a minute for sure. But those are the, the three or four that I go to for sure when I just need to, vent, or just let my, just be in a headspace that allows me to just, enjoy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, if you were to think of a song that best describes your journey, what would it be and why?
Wow, Cleone, that's a tough one. Oh man. If I was to think of a song that describes my journey,
Yes, whether it's
okay.
your journey, your personal journey, or the journey of being a mental health advocate, or your experiences, something, anything.
You know what? I'd have to say "We Fall Down, but We Get Up" by Donnie McClurkin. I'd have to say that.
Okay, that's a good one.
Yeah,
That's a good one,
yeah.
definitely. Awesome. So how can we stay in touch with you? What are your, how do we stay in touch with you?
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know what? I say, okay, one of the ways, I guess it depends on like if people are like looking for maybe to talk with me about, let's say, psychotherapy or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm certainly not afraid to talk about the virtual agency that I work with, I'm associated with, is Shift Collab. That's SHIFTCOLLAB, shiftcollab.com. Phenomenal. I think it's a phenomenal agency with respect to what they do, where they have a group of really great psychotherapists who just want to give of their time, in this virtual world that we are all forced to live in, to
Mm-hmm.
provide any kind of help for anyone who's looking for it, from students, people in university, people who are working stay-at-home individuals. So I've got the pleasure of working with them, and so that I just put that out there professionally in terms of anyone who might be looking for, some help with some individual therapy or couples therapy, or whatever they feel they need to take a look. Um, I would leave it to you, Cleoni, in terms of Kuinua is basically the consulting group is more about a grant writing, a resource enrichment group. So that speaks to my partner and I, are individuals who are we tap into or have people contact us should they be interested in maybe getting help with a grant that they have identified as something useful for what they're doing. The resource enrichment piece is more along what I do as a social worker and a public speaker with respect to providing and or identifying what other resources would be available to that individual, or what we could create um, with that person and their organization to enrich the services that they're looking to provide.
Mm-hmm.
So that email is wayne@kuinuaconsulting.com. And of course, they can always reach out to you, Cleoni. If anyone's interested, and say, hey, how do I get in touch with Wayne? And I know that you would reach back out to me. Kuinua Consulting, we're present on Facebook and Instagram, so I would say that those typically are the ways that people get in touch with me. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Wayne, for your insights.
Thank you, Cleoni.
I appreciate it.
It was
So,
fun.
definitely.
You
So
asked some tough questions, though.
I did.
No, they were good questions. They were good, for
Yeah.
real. I'm so proud of you, Cleoni, for what you're doing. Keep up the good work. You are definitely a beacon of light and hope for the mental health community. So don't stop.
Thank you very much. So with that said, and to all you resilient minds out there, until next time, please subscribe to us on all our platforms, and don't forget to rate the show and leave a review for us on Apple Podcasts. Also, join the community of resilient minds and sign up for our monthly newsletter at cleonicrawford.com. Be sure to grab a copy of my book, The Music of My Life, on all Amazon marketplaces to get to know me better. And if you can think of one person that will receive value from today's show or connect with Wayne, please share it with them. Feel free to take a screenshot of this week's episode of the podcast and tag me on Instagram. You can tag myself at Only Cleoni or Resilient Minds 365. And remember, mental health is not a death sentence. Despite your illness, you can strive, you can thrive, and live a life of abundance. Until next time, I'm Cleoni Crawford, and I'm signing off.